A forgotten key. A random apartment. A truth I never saw coming. In one moment, everything I believed about my marriage shattered, and what I did next will surprise you. Every morning, Linda and I have this habit, staying in bed for just a few extra minutes after the alarm goes off. It's become our thing, something we've fallen into over the years, and it feels like a small luxury. Those cozy, half-asleep moments are wonderful, but they always come at a cost, the inevitable rush to get ready for the day. When the kids were still living at home, those frantic mornings were even crazier, getting them dressed, fed, and off to school added to the chaos. Now that they're grown and out of the house, you'd think we'd be more organized. Instead, we've stretched those lazy minutes even longer, pushing the start of the day back as far as we can. But of course, the price remains the same, running around like maniacs trying to get out the door on time. Today, though, was especially hectic. I had to leave about 20 minutes earlier than usual, which threw off our already delicate routine. Linda had a late shift tonight, so we decided to carpool since our offices are pretty close. But instead of driving my car, I figured I'd take my mountain bike to work. The weather was supposed to be gorgeous, a perfect spring day, and it seemed like the right opportunity to get a ride in. I finished off my toast, chased it with the last swig of coffee, and grabbed my bag. "I'm heading out, honey." I called toward the bathroom, where Linda was still getting ready. I paused, waiting for her to reply or even peek out the door, but there was nothing, just silence. "I'll see you tonight. Love you," I added, trying to keep it light as I slung my backpack over my shoulder. I didn't have time to dwell on it, I was already running behind. Keys in hand, I hurried out the door and onto my bike. Before I go any further, let me introduce myself. I'm John Harris, 53 years old, and I work as an office manager at the State Department of Public Works. My wife, Linda, is 49 and works as an administrative assistant at a manufacturing company's main office. Now, I don't usually brag, but we're a good-looking couple, if I do say so myself. Linda, though, she's on another level. She's gorgeous, and she doesn't look anywhere near 50. I've seen plenty of men turn their heads when she walks by, and while I try to play it cool, it's hard not to feel a little proud. This morning started out like most others, with me choosing to bike to work instead of driving. The forecast had promised a beautiful spring day, and it felt like the perfect excuse to get some fresh air. About 10 minutes into my ride, my phone buzzed with a text, followed quickly by a call. Navigating traffic on a mountain bike isn't exactly the time to multitask, so I ignored it and kept pedaling. By the time I got to the office, I was in such a rush to clean up and get ready for an 8:45 meeting that I completely forgot about my phone. It wasn't until I was on my afternoon coffee break that I finally remembered to check it. That's when I saw the notifications, 5 messages from Linda, 2 texts and 3 voicemails. The first text, which she sent at 8:10, said, "You grabbed the wrong keys. Call me." The second one, which came in at 8:35, read, "I'm waiting for your call." I frowned, already knowing I'd messed up. When I listened to her voicemails, it was clear her patience had run out. The first one, left at 8:11, was curt but still calm. "Hey, you took the wrong set of keys this morning. Can you swing by my office and drop them off? I'm going to need them. Call me." Her tone was clipped, polite but firm. Still, something felt off. Linda wouldn't normally need those keys at work since her office uses key cards for security. The second voicemail, though, made it clear she was getting frustrated. She'd called again at 10:15, and this time, there was no calm left in her voice. "John, what are you doing? I've been waiting for the keys all morning. Call me back already. I don't have time to sit around waiting for you." At this point, I felt the weight of all 25 years we'd been together, 23 of them married. I know Linda's moods, and this was bad. When she's upset, her words have a way of cutting right through me. I sat at my desk, staring at the keys I'd tossed there earlier, knowing I should have checked sooner. The final voicemail, left at 12:55, nearly made me wince. Linda wasn't holding back anymore. Her voice was sharp and angry, every word hitting like a jab. "Where are you, John? I'm still waiting for those keys. I don't know what you were thinking this morning, but they'd better be on my desk this afternoon." I sighed and leaned back in my chair, phone in hand, the keys sitting right in front of me. She was furious, really furious. I knew I'd dropped the ball, but something still didn't add up. Why was she this upset about keys she didn't even need? Lately, I'd started noticing that Linda was always mad at me, and I couldn't figure out why. It seemed like even the smallest things would set her off, and I was getting tired of walking on eggshells. At first, I wondered if it had to do with her approaching 50, maybe hormonal changes or something like that. When I brought it up to her, though, she didn't take it well. I gently suggested she see a doctor, maybe look into hormone therapy or whatever it is they do for menopause, but she snapped at me. Things with Linda had become strained lately. Our relationship just didn't feel the same anymore. We were both tense, and any little disagreement seemed to blow up into something much bigger than it needed to be. Like this morning with the keys, she didn't even need them at work, but you'd think I'd committed some kind of crime the way she reacted. I was trying to work on myself, to stay calm and patient, but I'm no pushover. I figured two could play at this anger game, so I decided not to call her back. I'd just bring her the keys when she got off work at 5 o'clock. A little after 5 o'clock, I finally arrived at her office, only to spot her car pulling out of the parking lot. Big surprise, I thought. Between the traffic and the fact that I was on my bike, there was no chance I could catch up with her. Not that it mattered, we were both headed home. I figured she'd eventually break free from the gridlock and pick up a speed I couldn't match, so I took my usual shortcut through the park. It was a more direct route, and I even thought I might beat her home. But then something strange happened. As I pedaled through the park, I caught a glimpse of Linda's car turning onto a completely different road, heading toward a part of town she never had any reason to visit. I slowed down, my curiosity piqued. It didn't make sense, why would she take that route? It wasn't the fastest way home, not by a long shot. I stayed at a distance, careful not to get too close, and watched as she turned onto a street lined with rows of two-story duplexes. She slowed down and parked at the curb. I stopped, half hidden by the trees at the edge of the park, and watched as she climbed out of the car, walked up a short flight of stairs, and rang the doorbell of one of the units. Even as she stood there waiting, she was glued to her phone, typing away. A second later, I heard it, her phone chimed with a text message. She read it, turned around without hesitation, and walked straight back to her car. Then she drove off. I sat there frozen, watching her car disappear down the street, trying to process what I'd just seen. What the hell had just happened? Who lived there? Why had she stopped at a random house, rung the doorbell, and then left like it was nothing? Something wasn't adding up, and deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a set of keys. I muttered to myself, still trying to process what I'd just seen. Linda, who was supposed to be working late, had shown up at some random apartment. My mind was racing as I gripped the keys in my hand. I recognized her car key and our house key, but there was another one on the ring, something unfamiliar. I had a gut feeling this was the key Linda had been so desperate to get back. Before I could stop myself, I walked up to the duplex. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding. I climbed the stairs, inserted the mystery key into the front door lock, and turned it. The click of the lock sounded so final, like the end of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I didn't open the door right away. I just stood there, frozen, trying to think. What was I supposed to do? My rising anger pushed me toward bad ideas: barge in, rip the place apart, confront whoever this Eric Larson was, or wait for him and let my fists do the talking. I even thought about going to the police, but I knew that was no solution, it'd only land me in jail. No, acting out of blind rage wasn't the answer. As tempting as it was, I needed to stay smart. After taking a deep breath, I glanced through the window near the door. I knew I was technically trespassing, but I had to move quickly. The first thing that caught my eye was a small table in the hallway, a neatly stacked pile of mail sitting on top. I hesitated, then reached in and grabbed one of the envelopes, a phone bill. I tucked it into my backpack without looking too closely. The name on it was Erik Larson. I had no idea who he was, but now I had a name and something to work with. That was enough for now. I didn't want to risk getting caught snooping, so I backed out of the doorway, my mind spinning. Instead of heading straight home, I pedaled over to a nearby hardware store. Within minutes, I had a duplicate made of the mystery key. Whatever was going on, I needed leverage, and this key might give me answers. When I finally got home, I expected Linda's car to be in the driveway, but it was still empty. Wherever her lover had texted her to go, it clearly wasn't back to that duplex. My chest tightened as I realized how far this had gone. Feeling the anger simmering just below the surface, I decided to mess with her a little. I called her phone, but, no surprise, she didn't answer. I didn't leave a message. Let her wonder what I was up to for a change. Now I just had to wait. I didn't bother sending a text, but I did leave Linda a voicemail. I'm running late too, but I'll bring the key soon. I'll see you at your office. It only took a few seconds for her to reply, her tone short and to the point. That won't be necessary. I've made other arrangements. Just go home. I could almost hear her thoughts as I read her message, and leave me alone, idiot. The evening that followed was miserable. Linda didn't get home until nearly 10 o'clock, leaving me with 4 long hours to stew over what had happened. My mind raced, replaying every detail of the day and the past few months. At this point, I didn't just suspect, I knew, she was cheating, and now I needed solid proof. With the duplicate key I'd made earlier now on my keychain, gathering that proof would be easy. The phone bill I had grabbed from the apartment spelled everything out in black and white. The name Erik Larson glared up at me, and his number appeared over and over again, calls, texts, day and night. Even during the evenings when Linda and I sat together, she had been messaging him non-stop. All this time, I'd thought she was texting the kids. I'd trusted her. But did I really need to understand why she had chosen to leave me? Why she decided to throw away 23 years of marriage? No. It didn't matter anymore. I could see now that our love had been dying for a while. The last 6 months had been filled with nothing but indifference, constant nagging, and blame. That kind of tension wears a man down. Love doesn't disappear overnight, it fades, little by little, until there's nothing left. Today's discovery was just the final blow, the nail in the coffin of a marriage that had been falling apart for months. We were finished. There was no point in proving her adultery. In our state, it wouldn't matter. Irreconcilable differences would be enough for a judge to split our assets 50-50. But as the betrayed husband, I felt like I still had something to gain, my pride. I wasn't going to let Linda get away with this, not without the truth coming to light. I wouldn't hide it. Our kids, her parents, our friends, they would all know what she'd done. Knowing Linda, I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to spin the story to paint me as the villain. Over the past few months, I'd seen a side of her I didn't recognize, cold, detached, and manipulative. I wasn't about to let her rewrite history. I'll admit, I toyed with a lot of revenge scenarios. I thought about confronting her lover, exposing her at work, or even taking petty, vindictive actions to get back at her. But as tempting as those thoughts were, I knew better. That wasn't who I wanted to be. I wouldn't go down that path. I wouldn't let her betrayal drag me any lower than it already had. Linda had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. The marriage was over, but I still had control over how I handled the fallout. The truth would come out. That much, I could promise myself. I only had a few years left before early retirement, and I wasn't about to let this mess jeopardize it. Retirement wouldn't look anything like the dream Linda and I had once built together, but at least it would be mine, free of her and on my own terms. The alternative, ending up in jail or unemployed, wasn't an option. When Linda finally came home that night, I decided to let her irritation work to my advantage. If she started a fight, maybe I could use it to explain my cold demeanor over the next few days. But, apparently, her time with Eric had left her calm, or maybe just drained. When she walked through the door, she wouldn't even look at me. Linda seemed surprised to find me still sitting there in the living room. She tossed the spare car key into the dish by the door and immediately grabbed her usual set, which I had already placed there earlier. She didn't give me so much as a glance as she dropped them into her purse. I half expected a grunt or an offhand remark, but she didn't say a word. She just headed straight for the bathroom. "I'm tired," she muttered, as if speaking to no one at all, before disappearing down the hall. Sleep didn't come easily for either of us that night, though I doubt Linda noticed. The weight of what I'd seen, what I now knew, hung over me like a storm cloud. The next morning, under the pretense of an early meeting, I grabbed my car keys and left the house before Linda was even awake. But instead of heading to the office, I drove to an electronics store and picked up a few interesting items. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I needed to know the full truth, and I needed proof. It took me just a couple of hours to wire Eric Larson's apartment for sound and video. The place was nicer than I expected. Spotless, even. The furniture looked like it belonged in an antique shop, expensive, well-kept, like the kind of stuff you'd see in one of those home magazines Linda always used to read. I don't know if he had a cleaning service or was just naturally tidy, but there wasn't a single speck of dust anywhere. As I moved around the place, setting up the equipment, I had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. What was I even doing here? I kept telling myself this wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity, about regaining some shred of control in a situation where I had none. The next day, I had an appointment set up with a lawyer. I wasn't wasting time. That evening, though, I couldn't resist driving past Eric's apartment again. Sure enough, Linda's car was parked out front. Despite everything that had already come to light, seeing it there still hit me like a punch to the gut. A fresh wave of betrayal washed over me, sharp and undeniable. I sat in my car for a while, watching the apartment like I was hoping for answers that would never come. I thought about checking into the cheap motel on the edge of town for the night, just to get away from everything. But the idea felt ridiculous. Why should I have to leave my own home? None of this was my fault. Eventually, I drove back home. The house felt emptier than ever, as if Linda's betrayal had stripped it of warmth, of meaning. I sat there in the dark, trying to gather my thoughts. Tomorrow was going to be a big day. Everything was about to change. I thought about sleeping in the guest bedroom that night, but I refused to give up my place in the house. Why should I? Linda had clearly just come from another session with someone else, and seeing her walk through the door caught me completely off guard, again. She didn't bother offering any excuses for her lateness or the way she looked. Maybe she knew there was nothing she could say to make any of this better. I couldn't believe it had come to this. After everything we'd been through, I was the one left feeling like the source of so much pain. And with divorce looming over us like a dark cloud, I'd finally had enough. Without a word, I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the bedrooms. "What are you doing, John?" "You're hurting me," she whimpered, trying to pull away. I forced myself to sound stronger than I felt. "This is your room now, Linda," I said sharply, shoving her into the guest room. "We're no longer husband and wife. Stay away from me." She looked stunned, but her shock quickly turned to rage. "Oh no, bad boy, if anyone's sleeping in the guest room, it's you," Linda shouted, fury dripping from every word. She ranted about all the things she'd done, for me, for the kids, for the house, and demanded respect. She even had the audacity to tell me to leave. I didn't want to argue with her. My patience was gone. I shoved her back into the guest room with a force I didn't even know I had. Linda sat down on the bed, tears streaming down her face. She muttered something I couldn't quite make out. What was that? I barked, my anger getting the better of me. I'm sorry, she said louder this time, her voice shaking. I was so stupid. Please, don't hate me. Her words hung in the air for a moment, as if she thought they might make a difference. You know me, Linda, I said coldly. I won't hate you forever. But I sure as hell won't love you either. Honestly, I don't even know if I can stand to be around you. I turned to leave, pausing at the door for just one final blow. I'd prefer it if you left as soon as possible. Just sign the divorce papers when they arrive, and we'll never have to deal with each other again. Linda didn't say a word. She just sat there, crying softly into her hands as I closed the door behind me. That night, I parked myself on the living room couch, but sleep didn't come easy. My mind raced with everything that had happened. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the years of lies and distance that made this hurt even more. The next morning, I left the house early again, this time parking further down the street where I wouldn't be seen. From the evidence I had, my videos, my observations, I recognized Erik Larsson's smug face as he helped Linda load something into his car. That image burned into my memory. It was the final piece of confirmation I didn't need but got anyway. Linda and I were done. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. The truth, her truth, would come out, whether she liked it or not. I wanted to beat him up, Erik Larsson, the man who had stolen my wife, but with his extra 3 inches in height and a solid 40 pounds on me, that wasn't exactly a practical option. I gripped the steering wheel hard as I drove away, my anger cooling into something much heavier, loneliness. An overwhelming, suffocating kind of loneliness that I had never felt before. If the kids were still living with us, the divorce would have been even more devastating. Their absence, while a blessing in one way, felt like a curse in another. Without them in the house, the silence felt unbearable. Linda had been both their mother and my partner for over 2 decades, but now here I was, alone, suffering, and desperate for some shred of understanding or support. I had no choice but to confide in our daughters, Emily and Sarah. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I needed them to hear it from me, the truth about their mother's betrayal. I braced myself for disbelief, maybe even anger directed at me, but to my relief, neither of them questioned my story. For a fleeting moment, I worried they might have known all along. That thought made me sick. But when I saw the shock and distress on their faces, I knew they were hearing this for the first time. Their support felt like a balm to my broken pride, though it also left me with a nagging guilt. By the time I hung up the phone, I couldn't hold back the sobs that shook me. Emily and Sarah tried to comfort me as best they could, but I knew dragging them into this mess was a mistake. I should have handled it better. As I sat there later that night, replaying everything in my mind, I couldn't stop comparing myself to Erik Larsson. I'd let myself go a little since turning 50, sure, but I wasn't out of shape or completely falling apart. I wasn't overweight, and I still managed to keep up with the yard work and occasional bike rides. From what I'd seen of him, Larsson didn't look much younger or fitter than I was. He wasn't exactly a model of masculinity. That's when the doubt crept in. Was he a better lover? The thought stung worse than I care to admit. Linda and I had been each other's first real loves. Before her, I'd only had 4 girlfriends between the ages of 18 and 28. We'd grown together, learned together, and I'd always thought we were enough for each other. But now, I found myself wondering how long she'd been comparing me to him. It didn't seem like she'd left me for social status, either. His apartment was nice but far from extravagant, and while his furniture looked expensive, it didn't scream luxury. Whatever Linda saw in him, it wasn't about money or some lavish lifestyle. Later, I picked up my phone and dialed Linda's number. For a second, I thought about hanging up. I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear her voice, but I needed closure. I needed to confront her, to bring this nightmare to an end. When she answered, her voice was sharp and annoyed. "What is it, John? This is rude." "Rude, Linda?" I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "Is it the months of cheating? Moving in with your lover? Or is it all of the above?" The line fell silent, which somehow felt worse than yelling. I despised that silence. "Linda," I said, my voice softening despite myself, "I still have some feelings for you. I don't know if it's the foolish side of me talking, or just a part of me that can't let go. But there's one thing I won't do, Linda. I won't lie to our family." Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "You wouldn't dare." "Not Daddy. Please." "Watch me," I said simply, before hanging up. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. I didn't know if I felt victorious, broken, or somewhere in between. Then I remembered the phone bill I'd taken from Larson's apartment. I picked it up, scanning for his number, and dialed it. A man's voice answered. I said nothing at first, just listening to the sound of him on the other end of the line. "Hello?" he repeated, a little more impatient this time. I tightened my grip on the phone. This was the man who destroyed everything. And now, he was about to hear from me. I hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "Linda Harris, please," I said, my voice calm despite the fury simmering beneath the surface. There was silence on the other end, followed by faint crying in the background. "Linda, no doubt." Then a man's voice broke through. "Who's asking?" "Eric Larson." "Her father, you piece of garbage," I lied, my words laced with barely contained rage. "And don't expect to talk to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me, to leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye." I ended the call before Larson could respond. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed. It was Linda. I answered, already knowing this conversation was going to be another blow to both of us. "I'm listening," I said flatly. "John," she sobbed, her voice breaking. I cut her off. "Listen carefully, Linda. Don't ever let this man come between me and my daughters again, or your father will know everything. Every ugly, shameful detail of what you've done." My voice dropped lower, ice in every word. "Don't think I'm bluffing. I trusted you for most of my adult life. I didn't think it was possible for you to shatter that trust, but you did. And right now, I'm fighting not to lose it completely, not to let the hatred I feel consume me. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered through her tears. "John, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. I never." Her voice trailed off, but I didn't have anything left to say. I ended the call, feeling a mixture of anger and emptiness. I thought her regret might make me feel better, but it didn't. It just made the loneliness cut deeper. In the days that followed, the silence in my life became unbearable. I had sold the house and moved into a small apartment, splitting the proceeds as part of the divorce settlement. The space felt hollow and foreign, a far cry from the home Linda and I had once shared. One evening, as I stood in my living room staring at the clumps of dust gathering around the place, it hit me just how alone I was. I'd started to name the dust bunnies, something absurd, almost childlike. "Hi, Jack," I muttered, nodding toward a particularly large one stationed by the front door. Roger and Bugs had taken up residence under the bed and behind the couch. I shook my head at myself. Was this what my life had come to? Naming dust bunnies? It was as if I had reverted back to my bachelor days, only now with the added sting of betrayal and regret. One evening, as I sat there staring at nothing, my phone rang. Without looking at the caller ID, I answered. "You son of a," Linda's voice exploded through the receiver. "You had no right to speak to Emily and Sarah the way you did. For a moment, I considered hanging up, but something held me there. Maybe I wanted the confrontation. Maybe I needed it to finally put all of this behind me. "What's rude, sweetie?" I replied with mock calmness. "Is it the months of cheating? Moving in with your lover? Or is it all of the above?" There was silence on the other end, which somehow made me angrier. I despised her silence more than her yelling. Finally, I spoke again, my voice quieter this time. "Linda, some part of me still cares about you. I don't know if it's the foolish side of me talking, or maybe it's just a part of me that doesn't know how to let go yet. But one thing is certain, I can't live like this anymore." She started to say something, but I didn't let her finish. "It's over, Linda. I've made my decision. I hope he was worth it." I hung up before she could respond, gripping the phone tightly as the weight of everything hit me all over again. For the first time, though, my anger began to subside. In its place, a strange kind of clarity began to settle in. I knew what I had to do. I had to let go, not just of Linda, but of the anger, the bitterness, and the betrayal that had defined me over these last few weeks. It wouldn't be easy. But for the sake of my daughters, my own sanity, and the life I still had ahead of me, I needed to move forward. It was time to stop letting Linda's actions control me. Time to reclaim what little pride and peace I had left. I asked again, "Linda Harris, please." There was a pause, and through the phone, I could hear someone crying softly in the background, presumably Linda. A man's voice came through next. "Larson." "Who's asking?" "Her father, you piece of garbage," I lied, unable to suppress the fury boiling over inside me. "And don't expect to talk to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me, leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye." I hung up abruptly, but guilt immediately gnawed at me. Less than a minute later, Linda called, her voice trembling with nerves. "I'm listening," I said flatly, giving her a chance to speak. "John, please. Let me make this clear," I interrupted sharply. "Don't let this guy come between me and my daughters, or your father will know everything, all the raw, ugly details. Do you hear me?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm listening. I trusted you for most of my adult life, Linda," I continued, my tone cold and unwavering. "I didn't think it was possible for you to shatter that trust, but you did. I'm fighting not to let the hatred I feel define me completely, but right now, that's exactly what it's doing." Her quiet sobs were audible now, but I didn't care. The woman I had loved for over 2 decades was unrecognizable to me. I ended the call, my heart pounding with a mix of anger, sadness, and emptiness. In the days that followed, I tried distracting myself, even confiding in a coworker who'd also gone through a divorce. One night, things escalated into something physical, but it was a hollow experience. There was no love, no connection, just 2 broken people seeking momentary escape. Instead of feeling relief, I felt emptier than before. Returning to my small, new apartment one evening, an epiphany struck me as I glanced around the dusty, lifeless space. I'd been reverting to my bachelor days, right down to naming the dust bunnies. "Hi, Jack," I said aloud to the clump by the front door. Roger and Bugs were under the bed and behind the couch. I even caught myself laughing at the absurdity of it all. My life had fallen apart, and here I was making friends with dust. But I wasn't done with Linda. Not yet. One evening, I carefully orchestrated a little chaos at Larson's apartment. I shook up the sheets on his bed, leaving it just messy enough to look natural. I placed 2 glasses on the coffee table, left cigarette ashes in the toilet, and ran the ceiling fan so it hummed softly in the background. Then I grabbed one of his porcelain trinkets, smashed it, and tossed the shards in the trash. To finish it off, I opened the dustiest bottle of wine from his shelf, poured it down the sink, and left the empty bottle right on the counter. I wasn't proud of it. But if I'm being honest, I found a bit of dark satisfaction in creating a mess in the relationship Linda had chosen over me. Days later, the fallout arrived. Sarah, our youngest, called me. "Dad, Mom needs help," she pleaded. "She's not okay." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Linda had caused all of this, yet now I was supposed to swoop in and fix it. "Okay, Sarah," I relented. "But don't expect me to do more than pick her up and drive her somewhere. That's it." "Thanks, Dad," she said quietly. A few hours later, I found myself waiting at the police station. Linda had been brought in for questioning over some altercation involving larceny, though the details were murky. I sent her a note letting her know I was waiting outside. An hour passed before she finally emerged, looking tired and worn down. "Do you want to go home?" I asked. Without a word, she climbed into the car. She stayed silent until I turned onto Larson Street and parked in front of his apartment. "I don't want to go there," she said, her voice trembling. Tears filled her eyes. "Look," I said firmly, "Larson's in jail right now. You have time to gather your things and leave." Linda stared at me, searching my face for something, sympathy, maybe, or forgiveness, but I had none to offer. She got out of the car and began hauling out trash bags filled with clothes and other belongings. She hadn't taken much. As she loaded the last of her things into the trunk, she turned to me, tears streaking her face. "John," she whispered, "I never stopped loving you. I just forgot what that meant for a while. I didn't even want to stay with Eric. We didn't have much in common. I'm sorry for hurting you." I didn't say a word. What was there to say? I couldn't tell her it was okay, it wasn't. I couldn't tell her I forgave her, I didn't. The silence hurt her more than any speech ever could. As we neared her father's house, Linda finally asked, "What am I going to do now?" I didn't answer. It wasn't my problem to solve anymore. A few days later, I delivered what I considered the final blow to their doomed affair. I grabbed the cheapest bottle of Chilean wine I could find, $10, tops, and headed straight to Larson's apartment. He'd been released by then, and when he opened the door, the surprise on his face was priceless. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "We've never met, but I'm John Harris, Linda McKay's ex-husband." I handed him the bottle of wine. "Here, take this. I'm not a freeloader. This replaces the one I emptied earlier." Before he could say a word, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key to his apartment. I held it up for a second, then dropped it into his hand. "This belongs to you now," I said calmly. Then I turned around and walked away, leaving him standing in the doorway, speechless. It was over. Finally over.